This program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Inside Mojo podcast. This is episode 2. Today, we are talking about the lawsuit that nearly killed WatchMojo, but ultimately helped it become what it is today. I'm your host, Rob, and with me is Ash, our CEO and founder. I was going to ask you how you're doing today, Ash, but I can only assume that it's better than the day you found out you're being sued by Fox and IGN.
Yes, that is a fair statement. That is accurate. And that intro music gives me anxiety, but it's good to put me in the mood. Yeah, no, and it was funny because the day that I got served by the bailiff was May 9th of 2006. But I had received a letter near my birthday in March. My birthday is March 12th. And like March 19th or something, I ended up getting a letter without prejudice. It was like, we are watching you. And conduct yourself accordingly. And I was like, this is not good. I was like, they're not sending this. And then but in any case, yeah, no. So that was a long time ago, obviously. Covered it quite a bit then. And I know Inside Mojo is all about YouTube and, WatchMojo's origins and all that. But I've always said YouTube is the greatest emancipator of talent, so to speak. So it was a different era, like we were kind of putting some videos on YouTube, but no, let's get to it.
Yeah, let's set it up a little bit because we did a bit of a preview at the end of last week's episode. But for anybody who didn't catch that, 2005, you were working for Ask Men. You left on good terms and then went on to start WatchMojo, and everything was going great. So what happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think I like philosophy, psychology. So in my 5 years at Ask Men, I was actually extremely appreciative of the opportunity. Like I'd studied finance, worked at a startup, a tech search engine. And then, these three guys who had started Ask Men and who were my classmates at college or university, they kind of recruited me. And, as I said, this is a post 9/11 world. As much as I am atheist agnostic, my name is Ashkan Karbasfrooshan, this young, unproven Iranian Canadian born Muslim. I'm not saying it was like a black applicant sending their resume and they're like, I'm not getting a call back. Is there discrimination or bias? But subconsciously, yeah, it wasn't obvious for me. So I was from the get-go on cloud 9. I took a pay cut to join them. I did anything and everything. And it was a good run. But I think because I was extremely ambitious and driven, and as much as I was a team player, I think because I was generating a lot of the revenue there, like as a VP of sales, but also columnist, where I was writing 10 on columns in a 2-week cycle. And I could see that I was generating a lot of value on the commercial side and on the creative side. I think I wanted to have a bigger say in capital allocation. What do we decide? I never once said, I want more ownership as a small partner. I was always pretty, thankful for the opportunity, but I recognize that just when you have 5 people that work together for 5 years, there's going to be some friction. And as much as, you think things are well, there's seeds of resentment, frustration that are planted. So when I left, it was because basically IGN bought Ask Men. And then 5 months later, Fox News Corp bought IGN. So we were lost as a little tiny thing in this empire. And again, I always believe in doing the right thing. So I was like, I don't want to drag my heels and be territorial. So I kind of made myself redundant. And I looked at I remember there was a job opening in London and they were like, yeah, but I don't think we want to send anybody from North America there. I was like, okay. Then I was like, well, can I go to New York to do partnerships or whatever? No, we got somebody. So it was mutually, we kind of, subconscious, implicitly, we kind of realized this is the end of the road. So when I was leaving, when we were doing our termination agreement, they were like, we just don't want you to go to Maxim, which was Ask Men's competitor, or we don't want you to go to GameSpot, which was IGN's competitor. And I was to be honest with you, I'm 27. I was an entrepreneur by the end of my run, and I had the entrepreneurial bug. And I was like, yeah, I want to see if like my views on life and business make sense, because I realize you could be very idealistic, but then when you're in the trenches, you're like, yeah, that was a bit naive. So I was like, I want to test this out. So I said, I want to start a business. And I told them, I said, I'm going to produce videos because my non-competition agreement said, do not start an online men's magazine.
Right.
But obviously, even though they had said they didn't care, they did care. So.
All right. So, I mean, when you sign a non-compete agreement, what does that entail exactly? And is it easy to enforce that? I mean, we'll get into that once we talk about the court situation that you found yourself in. But generally speaking, are those things that companies normally go after people for?
So again, this is not like inside legal or inside, non-competes. It's but I think it's important to set it because I do get a lot of emails from people that ask me about this. So we'll talk about it and then, branch out. So, there's like, I call it the rules of engagement in business. You have like non-disclosure agreements, you have non-circumvention, non-solicitation, you have non-competition agreements that you sign usually either at the beginning of your tenure. Occasionally, it could be during and under specific situations where that would make sense. And then when you leave, you might kind of update it again if you're like senior or whatever. So a non-competition agreement, which I would say in places like California are like unenforceable, but in most jurisdictions, they're there to be fair. Like the goal of, people always criticize lawyers in the legal system, but I mean, there's reasons why it's there. And a lot of it does make sense. So it's to both protect the company's trade secrets and whatnot, but also they're not there to prevent an individual from gaining, employment, right? So it's more like it's like a balance. And so how do you measure that? So a non-competition agreement is usually enforced also like on senior people, key people, specific situations. If an intern goes sign something, especially if it's a contract of adhesion that you just sign without negotiating, it's probably moot. But so basically there's three main clauses. One is scope, which is just a definition of like either what the scope of the competitive industry or business or operation is. So in my case, it was Men's Online Magazine. They would have never been able to, basically, say you can't do anything in digital media. That would have been too broad. And the courts would say, yeah, it's a bit, too broad and exhaustive. The second one is territory. And it's funny because at the time I was like, yeah, okay, we're like a global, the internet is global. So, I was like, I understand why the territory would be global. But in hindsight, I actually think, well, because it was ultimately about earning a living, I don't even know if it could have been like, well, what, I can't get a job in Montreal, so that's a bit weird. But I didn't really overthink the global territory. And then the third one was the term. If an employer goes, you cannot do something for 2 years or 5 years, that's way too long. It's unreasonable. And what I learned was courts will not like remedy or fix or clarify those three clauses if they're broad, unfair, too extensive. So ironically, as a company, you may want to set a very short term if you really want to make it enforceable to say, hey, it's only 6 months. Like you can't say we're acting in bad faith. We're saying for 6 months or maybe 12 months, depending on the industry. But mine, I think, was a year or two, which was also a bit like broad. So those are the three. And no, it's case by case. I think in my situation, it became personal. I'm not saying it was frivolous to them. It was definitely frivolous to the courts, I think, by the outcome.
Right.
But I think for them, it was like, my old boss probably was just looking for a way to screw me, and then it was like, oh, here's this non-compete. Let's use that. When, we started to build WatchMojo, obviously something triggered them.
I'm going to get into that more, but I think we have a poll that's going up on the YouTube channel. So this poll is asking, as a creator, would you rather be your own boss or have the security of a steady income? So answer that poll, and we'll get back to that towards the end of the episode. So where were we? We were talking about the constitutes, a non-compete agreement. So I know that you went to great lengths to try to avoid infringing on that with the early videos that WatchMojo was producing. But ultimately, what was it that got their attention? And I think we have a clip of a particular video that maybe triggered some
We
things.
had the audacity. That's Kevin Havel, a much younger looking, Kevin Havel, who still works with us and one of our esteemed colleagues, was the model. So this was a host, as I had a script. People would come looking for opportunities, and I was like, well, what do you do? And let's say this host was like, oh, I'm a stylist. So we're like, great. So we did how to tie a tie, and we broke it down into the Windsor knot and whatever. Now, this was after we'd done like how to hide your hips, or like how to, I don't know, like dye your hair, or how
more
to, like,
female-oriented,
purposely
videos
to kind of mitigate the risk. But literally, I was told after the fact that when we did this one video, hey guys, Sarah, that's an intense profile pic, Sarah. Focus, Ash, focus. So yeah, no, when we did this, literally after the fact, I was told by employees who were working at Ask Men at the time that this was what set off my old boss, and he lost his mind and decided to unleash a very bad idea, which then, didn't go anywhere, but nonetheless.
Right. So then you got served, and then you had to show up in court, and it's my understanding that you represented yourself. So tell us about that. How did that happen? Why didn't you get a lawyer?
Okay, so aside from the fact that I had very limited funds, it wasn't it, because I was like, well, I'd rather use these funds to prevail. Otherwise, I'm kind of screwed. What happened was, I mean, without getting into the technicality, they didn't go to the merits stage, which is like you discussed, the non-competition. They went extra asshole Supreme Level 5, which was like, let's just file an injunction to shut this poor guy down until the merits. And then the way the court system works with delays, that would, by then, whatever, it's moot. He will probably move on and do something else. We'll teach him a lesson. So they actually served me with an injunction. It could be provisional. It could be, it could be.
Oh yeah, we got a nice slide for this here.
There you go. And so they came in actually initially with like, they called it interlocutory, but their lawyers always make mistakes. It happens. They actually kind of used the 4 tests, which included urgent. And I was shocked where the judge was telling them, why are you calling it an interlocutory when you're including urgent? So they actually went back, fixed it, and came back. But so basically they had to prove that this was an urgent matter. Like I was causing this harm, irreparable harm. And irreparable harm is not like, oh, some damages. Irreparable harm means you are causing such a degree of harm that is impossible to measure, meaning if at the end of the trial, the merits you lose, a lot of ifs, there's no amount of money that could remedy the harm you caused, which is a bit laughable, as no disrespect to Kevin putting on a tie. And then there's a lot of other things like the balance of convenience, meaning until we go to trial, like, is it more, if we give this injunction to Fox and IGN, and I had no issue with Fox. Fox was like, this was an insignificant thing to them. It was largely the a-holes at Ask Men and the losers at the time at IGN, who was a different regime. But at that point, I mean, this was central casting out of Moronville there. And I was very diplomatic at the time, but now I could just say these guys were they were showing their own, kind of wrath. I talk about sins and virtues. It was their own insecurities. It was their own shortcomings. I mean, it's very clear now. But at the time, I was still trying to be diplomatic, say, how could we resolve? There you go, sins and virtues. So yeah. And so basically, they also had to there's this other test with injunctions, which is interesting. It's, what is the likelihood of what will happen at the merits? Now, here it was hard to determine, but if a judge sees a very frivolous case, a very frivolous request for an injunction, and like prima facie, at face value, he or she is like, yeah, I'm not so sure if at the end this holds any water, that's another test. But ultimately, the reason why I represented myself was because it was an injunction. It wasn't in court, officially a courtroom where I could sit next to a lawyer. This was in the judge's chamber where the judge, which in the end was a she would review the 2 lawyers. It would be very limited, and then she would kind of determine my fates. And I was like, as much as I understand it's going to be very procedural and I cannot introduce new evidence, which was really the bitch part. I had to be defending myself based on their own words, kind of like David and Goliath, which is the picture I use in that article on Context is King. So the idea was, I said, well, wait, if the idea here is that they want to kind of get a lawyer who is good at the procedure, but may not be able to say, my lady, this is ridiculous. These guys are running a website, publishing articles. about, again, how to find the freaking G-spot, which was every other stupid article Ask Men used to do at the time, whereas I was doing things like entertainment, pop culture, history, business. But yeah, the idea was that, like, well, a lawyer may not be able to get into that context.
Right.
And the whole goal is to get you to start to incur legal fees before you even get to the actual merit stage. So as a joke, when I was talking to lawyers, one of them was like, you know what? It's almost like the only shot you have is if you represent yourself. And we kind of laughed. We chuckled. We're like, Mr. Bean showing up to court. Wouldn't that be funny? But then I was like, this light bulb. I was like, look, at the end of the day, yeah, I'm very like temperamental if somebody is dishonest or lies or is just fucking clueless. Eventually, I'm like, yo, shut up. Like, this makes no sense. But I'm actually very diplomatic when I need to be. I'm very not demure, but I could be very calm. I'm not going to get there and go like, they can't handle the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly, I was like, it is basically an exercise in debating. And I could just look at their documents and say, hey, my lady, they say Ashkan poses a risk or may pose a risk. May pose a risk. So it was like an exercise in reading, and these guys were 2-digit IQs. So yeah, I managed to basically just show up to court on a Monday. And that weekend I was watching Munich. So I was like, now I'm pretty calm, but I was like
You're jazzed up.
I was like eating glass and the glass was bleeding. I was like ready to go.
Chuck Norris style.
Yeah. And even when look, inside, I'm immortal. I'm a mere human being there. So I was pissing. But the lawyer even looked at me and he's like, I'm the president of the Bar Association. Well, where's your lawyer? Like, I'm not going to take on a layman. And I was like, let's just see. I was like, let's just go to court. I was like, drop the gloves. Don't worry about me. You worry about you. Inside, like I should have worn a diaper, but projecting confidence and swagger, And so we went to court and they got up and they presented, frankly, a bunch of garbage. It was like, I'm very fair. I give credit where it's due. But I was like, these are weak arguments and these are really weak precedents because they could open up the history of law and hammer away. And I, like David, had to use their weapons against the so-called Goliath. Right. But I slayed them. And so I just went through an hour and a half. I'd have no difficulty in talking. And I just dismantled every argument. And the judge was like, come back tomorrow. And I was like, well, this can't be urgent because if it was urgent, you'd shut me down. And I prevailed at the injunction, but they went on for a while.
Did you know that they didn't have a leg to stand on from the very beginning, or was there ever any doubt in your mind that you might actually be in trouble? No.
Because it's all about optics, and like I've learned a lot. Law is again, I'm not these guys. Lawyers are bullshit. The legal system is bullshit. No. There's a lot of it that makes sense. I like lawyers. I think they're pretty much it's the clients who give in to their sins, like their greed, their wrath, their fear. It's those emotions that humans don't control. The lawyer is just telling you what your options are at the end of the day. But the way they presented it, it was like, look, we have an article on how to tie a tie. Here's a video. And they were just doing these like comparables that were kind of like not red herring or whatever term, but it was like when then you kind of sleep on it, wake up, you're like, wait a minute, I actually have a shot, not just at the injunction that they wouldn't, it's not urgent, I'm not causing them harm, but you're like, wait a minute. I'm going to eat you. I'm going to devour you. And I'm going to just mess you up in ways that you don't know. Because yes, you knew Diplomatic Ash. That mofo is dead. You're going to get Crazy Ash. And you're going to regret turning on Crazy Ash. And then, yeah, they were basically after when I won the injunction and their lawyer got up and he was like, on va continuer, this and that. I was like, no, continue, please. But by then I could speak to more lawyers, build the defense, but mainly I started to write about it, and I was like basically still limiting what I would say, not to be like at risk for defamation or, tilting my cards, so to speak. But I was like, yeah, this one guy had the charisma of a cucumber and the other guy's like a pumpkin because he's only relevant once a year when it's time to give payroll. And then they were like very embarrassed of this. They were like, this is too much. It's below the belt. And I was like, excuse me. I said there might be. I was like, fuck you. And like, fuck all of you because you're a bunch of idiots. You totally came, you blindsided me, you put sticks, you put a machete up my ass, basically. And now when I just said, oh, excuse me, can I remove this? I didn't even take the machete. I just pushed you away. And now like a bunch of pussies, you're like crying, to stop this. And then they were like, we should settle. And I was like, okay, just drop the case. But then because these morons at Ask Men had convinced their overlords at IGN, who convinced their overlords at Fox, like Rupert Murdoch is like, you know, regime changing Mozambique or whatever, you know, he's like putting fucking, you know, telephone bugs in dead people's like phones. That's what they did. Piers Morgan is wherever good or bad. I mean, that's what they were doing, right? And I was like, just drop it. But because they had spent so much money, they wanted something, and I kind of threw them a bone because, again, I don't act out of, you know, ego or vanity. I was like, okay, so we kind of said, okay, for a year, we're going to take down that stupid how to tie a tie video. And guess what's the first video we did on day 366? How to tie a tie. Anyway.
That's great. Well, there's another video that you did in response, which maybe we can show that to the audience because it's great. Maybe walk us through what happened here.
I mean, this we almost need audio, but we'll link to it somewhere. So this one, I showed up one day and I had depositions. I've learned so much about the law.
Don't fall in the trap of hiring.
Oh, there we got audio.
What you should do is know that you have options. And your best option when your back's against the wall is to call us at Vandela Associates. See, the trick is we're not lawyers, and we know it, though we just pretend that we are. So when we go into court and we recommend things and we have our own little strategies, no one knows what to expect next. That's why sometimes, yes, we do get charged with contempt of court, but in the end, that gives you, the client, the advantage, and it doesn't cost you much. This book in my hands, this ain't a code of civil procedure. These books behind me, these aren't law books. And indeed, we're not wearing pants because we're not lawyers. We're Vandela Associates.
So I have to explain what the hell this is. So during my deposition, I showed up to work at Summer in Montreal, like our first office. We probably did not have AC. So I was in shorts and sandals and I'm like, oh shit, we have like deposition. So I went to their legal offices, fancy schmancy lawyers' offices in like sandals and shorts and crushed it. But then when I came back, I was like, oh, this was so funny. And we were, as I said, we were like a poor man's version of Matt TV, which is a poor man's version of SNL. So we were producing these sketch comedy skits. And so I was like, wouldn't it be funny if there was like because I wasn't a lawyer. So I was like, it's like a law firm that's not really lawyers. And this was really, I think if at the time anybody saw it, they were like, who are these demented people? This was clearly like trolling them and being like, you're going to lose to a guy who was wearing shorts today, basically. Anyway, so it was fun. And I think we could have gone a very different direction instead of top 10 list because my heart was set on doing sketch comedy for once upon a time.
So tell me how this whole experience shaped WatchMojo moving forward.
Yeah, so let's now fast forward. I said YouTube is the greatest emancipator. And I think in 2006, you know, I saw what YouTube was going to become, but most people probably didn't. And I do think talking about insecurities, I don't want to say everybody, but most creators. Yeah, this is a great line, by the way. So this is Sir Anthony Hopkins. I know your instinct is to do everything you can to gain the appreciation of those around you, but it's an impulse that steals your time, energy, mental, and physical health. End fucking quote. So look, we're all driven by insecurities, whether it's to prove your daddy wrong, whether it's to show that you're better than your older sister, or whether it's like, hey, you know, like, I could build a successful company myself. And so I think a lot of creators who eventually kind of default to YouTube, they are kind of like a chip on their shoulder, like rejects of Hollywood, which is like a bullshit, antiquated gatekeeper mindset, where the entire business model is around not letting talent have access to audiences and platforms, right? Hence gatekeeper model. Mm-hmm. So eventually, a lot of these creators, whether they realized it or not, they could bypass the bullshit politics of traditional media and this kind of nightmare scenario that I endured with this lawsuit, where every day I would wake up in the middle of the night wanting this to go away, and I knew it wasn't going to go away. And it went on for a year. And then after that, it was like 6-7 years of struggling to meet payroll. Imagine every night. And then, so how does it connect? I think a lot of creators would give up everything they have on YouTube to be Hollywood stars. Now, maybe that goes down with the passage of time in 2025, but at least in 2012, 2013, every time I was like at VidCon or an event, I could see, I could smell, I could sense the insecurity and this desire to make it in Hollywood. But so we ultimately, obviously, we were working with rights holders to create lists and kind of montages featuring B-roll Most rights holders were okay with that because it was editorial and they recognized it was fair use, fair dealing. And SNL belongs to NBC Comcast. They rely on parody. VH1 relied on some fair use, I'm sure. So this was, again, hypocrisy. But occasionally we would get like an intimidating letter without prejudice. And I would be like, bring it fucking on, because I knew what the law was and I knew we were not infringing on copyright. So when people would start to kind of try to scare us and scare me, and this was kind of my bigger purpose. I was like, yeah, I was born in Iran. It was a revolution. Freedoms and liberties evaporated. You come to the West, you don't take these things for granted. So I did, as much as people could roll their eyes. From the get-go, to me, fair use, fair dealing wasn't because I wanted to do a top 10 lesbian makeout scenes video, although I probably did want to do that video. It was really more about, no, if I want to criticize the Olympics for being just a shitty organization, for example, of course, I'm not saying they are, we're going to use footage from the Olympics to show that they are shitty, for example. And it would be censorship if they use copyright tools like Content ID to take down our videos. So I was like literally like a bit maybe in my own, believing my own kind of narrative, but it was sincere. I was really very much into defending freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of media. And I think it worked because obviously we survived and we did help make Content ID on YouTube more fair, because YouTube early on had definitely, and it's their right as a platform, it's not a like a nonprofit funded by the government or something. It's a corporation. They initially, to protect themselves, like WatchMojo wasn't going to sue them for not being able to use a makeout scene from some movie from the 80s between two very hot actresses. But yeah, Viacom could come and did sue them for $1 billion. So basically, it's clear to me that everything happens for a reason, and that lawsuit gave me the confidence and the framework to really single-handedly like just not give in and prevail to some extent.
Having gone through that experience, do you have any suggestions or advice for creators on how to avoid getting themselves into a similar situation with a lawsuit?
I mean, if you're a creator who works for like a Paramount to create like videos, that's one thing. If you're young and just getting experience, you don't have the leverage as like a mid-career, writer or videographer who's like a bit of a track record resume who could maybe say, well, I'm not going to agree to this or that. But I think it does boil down to communication. I think communication is what shapes relationships and thus culture. So if you communicate well, again, my old boss I liked them a lot. To this day, he's one of the people that influenced me. As much as I'll curse, this is still entertainment. I have nothing but gratitude to him, despite the lawsuit, which I know people may not believe. I think, I would be somewhere, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my experience at AskMan, because I learned about content and whatnot. But I think really for a normal person, like he was a bit of a mob style thinker, like loyalty. And even though it was like Donald Trump, but like not really type of thing, or like imagine like a poor man's version of a mob boss, So he had like a very antiquated view of things, which is what I tried to avoid with WatchMojo, where I'm very different, I like to think. But I think it's communication, and then also not believing people just because they say something. As much as I'm old school and I'm more a man of my word, a handshake, and I go, it doesn't matter what you sign in a contract if a person acts in bad faith. I do think that you do have to be careful not to give people the benefit of the doubt who have like a mean streak, who do demonstrate wrath, who are petty. But if you work with people that you legit trust, then you could kind of throw caution in the wind a bit. But it's really about communication and then setting expectations. Because I was told, we don't care if you do your own thing. And that was a blatant lie. They were a bunch of lying assholes. And they know who I'm talking about specifically. It's a couple of them, not even AskMen, but IGN, who are long gone and irrelevant. But yeah, I was a bit naive. So don't be naive. But also, if you do have somebody that's like, I like to think I give advice to people as an individual, as a friend, as an industry career guy. It's really advice for them. But that's rare. I have my own flaws, but most people, like, it's true. Corporations don't care. And we're seeing it now. Like a year ago, it was LGBT flags and hashtags about empathy and do this and that and be good. And now, like, corporations can't fucking cut employees quick enough, so they're full of shit.
Having been on the receiving end, would you ever sue somebody?
So, remember when you decided to start your own podcast?
Yes, I do. I remember having a discussion with you about this.
Well, so at any moment now, somebody's going to knock on your door. No, I'm
Oh
kidding.
boy.
No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm kidding. No, look, I personally, like Ashkan, professionally, personally, ceteris paribus, all factors being equal, I wouldn't, because most lawsuits are disappointing, underwhelming, costly, and don't give you the outcome you want first. So even from a self-serving case, it's not worth the hassle. But two, I do believe in karma. I do believe in a lot of things like that. And I do believe in again, go with where I started. I always, maybe not you, but people have heard. I'm like, look, in a different outcome, my fate would have been to die somewhere in some field in Iraq as a young Iranian soldier, like 8 years old. You know, like people could read this and go, this guy's a bit, you know, he's off his meds. I don't take meds. But I did always view everything as gravy. I viewed it as I have so much privilege and such. So I would never do that. I'd be like, who is I to prevent you from earning and doing this and that? But not to be a hypocrite. Yeah, like a few years ago when we brought on investors and set up a board of directors, I also recognize like I have a fiduciary duty as CEO to take care of all stakeholders. So I believe in fairness. I believe in justice. My influences were, again, it sounds a bit, trite, like Cyrus the Great, people who believed in justice, King Solomon, people in fairness and whatnot. I wouldn't, but I think in an egregious scenario, and mine wasn't, but in a scenario where somebody acts in bad faith, uses trade secrets and or is just asking for it, I may not have a choice because my board could be like, look, this is a risk. And if you don't realize it, then maybe you should not be CEO. But my default mode is no, live and let live. Fuck it. Just go have a fucking glass of wine and just laugh it off there, more power. And also, when I've been very lucky to meet a lot of very smart people in this industry. When I had like a meeting at Bloomberg, we're just talking, I was like, oh, great lobby, this and that. It's so great. And one guy was like, well, it's not so great if you leave because you would never, ever, ever be welcome back. And I don't even have any grudges. Like we have we have a lot of retention, but we'll gladly take people back at the company if they just kind of wanted to test something else.
All right. I think we have the poll results ready, but we'll show those in just a few seconds. If you haven't answered that yet, you still have some time. We wanted to ask about what the balance is like between personal and business life. And we have a slide for this. So if you can comment on that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, my old boss, I just use this because my old boss used to always be like, it's not personal, it's business. And I think that's bullshit because there's this quote by Rick Lenz, who I won't lie, I didn't know who he was, but I use it in many of my presentations. Those who say it's not personal, it's just business are lying. All business is personal and the best business is very personal. I'm not saying I agree verbatim with that, but absolutely. I mean, look, business, as my dad used to say, is busyness. It's staying busy. It's what it is, right? So it's a hobby. Of course, it's how you earn a living, so you should take it seriously. But it's like when I used to play football, I was, I liked that I was just one of the guys. It didn't matter if I was a janitor or CEO, and I liked that. I liked that anonymity. And then people would eventually be like, "Oh, are you the guy that I know?" But until that point, I liked that it was like even very communal and all that. But I was like, the only time when I was like, finish your play, don't give up on the play. And so you do have to, I believe, kind of take things personally, but not too much. It's like you might have heard me say, I take what we do seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. At the end of the day, we rank top 10s on movies and music. Yes, there was a period, fair use, expression, media, but don't take yourself too seriously in life because you could all die tomorrow.
How does this all tie in with the ego? I know we have another slide on that. Everybody has egos, and a lot of egos come into play in business.
Well, I mean, look, like, first of all, this is a great quote by, I guess, Greek American now, maybe, but definitely Greek basketball player Giannis Antetokounmpo. I should be able to say that better. And this is one of my favorite quotes. When you think about the past, that's your ego. When you think about the future, that's your pride. When you think about the present, that's humility. I'm like, mind blown. So look, my old boss was probably stuck somewhere between ego of like the past, like Ash did this, said this, and I didn't like it, and okay, fuck off, And what if Ash builds this big empire? And ironically, their concern was Ash as a commercial like maven, like this guy who would go sign deals. Ironically, WatchMojo was built more on programming. It was the editorial. It was the content that became popular because YouTube sells the ads against this great emancipator creatives can't, when Hank Green or John Green, one of them at VidCon a few years ago said, YouTube creators don't need advertisers. The advertising community was like, oh, what? But he was right, because YouTube with AdSense and Google Preferred and YouTube Select is this incredible, now you got to build your audience. But so I was a bit the same way, that I did not need to settle, but that would have been my ego and pride. So I did like the reasonable thing to settle. And I try to use that every day. And we all have pride. The key is not to let it become hubris. We all have some ambition and you need it, but you don't want blind ambition where you will burn people and steal and cheat. So it's all about, you need a bit of ego, you need a bit of pride, but too much, downhill.
All right, let's get to our poll results. I'm curious to see what everybody said.
Oh, God,
the question was whether you would rather be your own boss, take that risk, or have the security of a steady paycheck. So while we wait for that, maybe we can do a quick preview of next week's episode, which is running out of cash. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, the irony was that after all this, my victory for not being shut down with an injunction and then prevailing, with settling with these batardos was that, oh, good, now I get to continue to burn whatever savings I have by effectively hiring some friends to videotape other friends doing random videos, right? I mean, like I hired a friend to record another friend who was a bartender, make drink recipes or play guitar riffs. It was a bit weird. I mean, it made sense to me, but people thought it was weird. But so we kind of in 2006 to settle, I hired a lawyer. So just at the end, from the end of the injunction that I prevailed to pre-trial, so just doing a couple deposition in my shorts and just to eventually handle the settlement. Because again, if I let my ego and pride think, oh, I'm a lawyer, all of a sudden I'll settle, then I could get screwed. That was like $30,000, $40,000. Like that was $30,000, $40,000 to do not nothing, but it wasn't never a day in court. So we were kind of running out of money. And then, yeah, by basically the next year, December of 2007, I remember going to Toronto on a very cold, blistering day. And Toronto, when it's cold, it's on Lake Ontario. It's really brutal. I went and I was hoping that one investor would invest, and they're like, nope, we're not going to do it. And I remember coming back, sitting in my cold car at like midnight outside Trudeau Airport. I couldn't, not even the decency to find parking indoors. Ran out of gas. No, I'm kidding about that part. I had gas in the tank, but I was like, I'm screwed. We're out of money now. So I thought we might have to shut down, but obviously we didn't.
Interesting story. Can't wait to hear more about that next week. So we got our poll results in. As a creator, which of these options do you prefer? And 71% said they'd choose the steady paycheck, while 28% said be your own boss. Sounds about right to me. I think, the balance.
Most people, look, I used to think like anybody could be an entrepreneur. It's not true. It's not a knock. The reality though is like that leap. I used to like have big ambitions and plans at night, occasionally nursing a nice glass of scotch, thinking I'm going to wake up tomorrow and go take over the world. But then you wake up in the morning and you're like, it's cold. It's a scary world. What am I doing? I'm just going to stay in bed. Although now it's the opposite. I wake up and I'm like, let's go. It's like, you're alive. This is like, what are you wasting time? Let's go hit the pavement. But I think most people are, I wrote about this on LinkedIn, I think, which was basically, it's very rare to find people who have both entrepreneurial traits, but who are also risk takers. Mm-hmm. Like you could be a risk taker and do crazy deals, but you're playing with like the bank's money. So you're a trader, but if you blow your investment, you don't care. You still got your 3 mistresses and your 5 cars and your bag of Coke, I guess. But like, but you could be somebody else who's like crazy risk taker. That you're like really entrepreneurial, but you're like, yeah, you know what? I need a paycheck. And I understand that. So that's not surprising.
All right. Well, I think that does it for today's episode. Thank you, Ash. Thank you to everybody who watched. And be sure to check in next week for the story of how WatchMojo rebounded from the from the lawsuit that we just talked about today. So until then, take it easy. Thank you again, Ash. And we'll see you guys next time.
Cheers.